Hey guys, so today I'm going to cover how to create a custom save action with web forms markers. This is going to be a two-part series. Today's session is really going to be a basic introduction to this creating this custom save action. Part two will be more on a custom save action that allows you to have an additional dialog that allows you to map fields. So the scenario I'm going to be running, which we'll probably get more into on phase two or step two of this series, but is we're going to be posting data from the web forms markers fields to an external source using a server-side form post. And so today's session is just showing the save action, how it works, how you configure it, how you get it going and setting it up inside web forms markers and adding it to an existing form that you have defined. And then phase two or step two is just showing you how to create this custom dialog and allowing you to map, let's say you have a first name field on your form, how to map that to a posted data endpoint on the external post. Also being able to add a custom URL. So you'd basically have this custom dialog. You'd have a single line text for a URL to post to. And then you'd be able to map fields, which I'll show at the end of this, how this is already being used for other types of custom save action. Well, not custom save actions, but built out of the box custom save actions that are built into web forms markers by default. And then how that feature I'll demonstrate how that will apply to what we'll be building in step two of this demo. So to get started, we're going to be using the existing example solution that I've been using for a lot of my videos. This is not going to demonstrate Helix. What's important to know if you wanted to do Helix is you could just create a new module, preferably either in your foundation or more than likely in your feature layer, where you would define your forms. And then this is where you would place all these custom save actions, or if you even had custom form validations or verifications, you would also place that in there. And I'll talk about that in a second when I get to the Sitecore configuration side. So the first part of this setup is working within Visual Studio. You'll need to define a class that will handle what you do with the data that it's getting back. First is we'll work out of the example.infrastructure project. So the first part is to make sure we have the proper references. So to do that, I'm going to do an add reference. I'm going to go to browse, and then I'm going to select the Sitecore WFFM abstractions, and then I'm also going to select Forms Core and Forms Custom. So important to note, and also to kind of step back just quickly, you must make sure you have web forms markers installed in order to do this session. So if you are unsure or not sure if you have web forms markers installed, if you go to your Sitecore instance and you go to the system folder and then to modules, and you see the web forms markers here, you probably more than likely have it installed. You may want to, if it's been a while, or especially in a sandbox environment, you might just want to reinstall web forms markers just to be on the safe side. But obviously, if you're in a production environment, you're not going to want to reinstall it just because developers already set it up, and you shouldn't need to reinstall it. So if you're in your sandbox environment and you've installed this using Sim, and you're not sure if you installed it or not, you can actually right-click and install modules, and then you can select web forms markers to have it installed. Or you can also always install it manually just by going to Start Menu, Development Tools, and Installation Wizard. So this is assuming you have web forms markers already installed. I'm not going to go through that process of installing since I've covered that in a previous video on my YouTube channel. So I will try to include a link in the description below to that existing tutorial session, but this is assuming you already have it installed. So let's say you just had it installed, but you have in your solution structure, you have a libraries folder. Now, some instances use some sort of gulp task to pull DLLs from your Sitecore instance into your where your solution lives. Usually those are separated. But if you don't, you'll have to manually move these, and you'll just need to make sure that inside the libraries folder you have the DLLs that I just mentioned. You probably want to move everything related to WFFM. So all the Sitecore.forms DLLs and all the WFFM DLLs you'll need to move over, especially as you do more customizations to WFFM or web forms markers. So I'm going to select those DLLs and I'm going to click add. Okay. So now I'm able to just start customizing web forms markers because I have references to the project. So the first part of this is I'm going to create a new folder called form. Forms is actually what I called it. So in this folder is where I'm going to place all my form modifications. This doesn't necessarily have to relate to web forms markers. You could have MVC form modifications that you could place in here. We could have called this WFFM instead, but I don't think that really matters. It's really just going to contain form modifications. So inside this form modification, I'm going to create a folder called save. So this is where I'm going to place all my save actions that I'm going to eventually have. Hopefully I'm going to create quite a few tutorials on different types of form actions or form save actions that you might want to create in different scenarios. Another type of form action that you can have is a form verification. So we could create theoretically a some sort of verification folder, and this is where we place all the verification classes that we would implement, and then we would define and specify in our Sitecore instances using items. Since we're not, that's just a quick description of that. Also, it's not included in this project, but we don't have any way to track Sitecore items in source control. I'm hoping to do a session here soon on Unicorn and on TDS. If you have one of those installed, it's important to, when we're defining these Sitecore items, we need to also make sure they're added to source control. So you're either going to use a config file using Unicorn to specify the paths to pull down, or you're going to use TDS to sync or get Sitecore item to get that specific Sitecore item so it's tracked within source control. So in the save action, I'm going to create a new class, and I'm going to call it external post. And this is where I'm going to start defining my external post implementation. This implementation needs to inherit from iSave action. So once we have that, we can do a control period, which will give us all the references of or all the things that match that interface. So you can see that it's telling me to include Sitecore WFFM abstractions action. So if I click that option, it's now added as a reference up above or as a using statement. You'll still note that it's underlined. That means we need to implement this interface. So to do that, we can just do again a control period and then click enter, and it will implement that interface. So by default, when you do that, you're going to see a throw new not implemented exceptions. What we're going to do is actually start implementing these by changing the code. So all these, the action ID, the unique key, and the action type, these are all properties. So all I'm going to do for these is just put getter and setters on them, and that's that. Get set, and then just describe what these are real quick. These are different properties that are going to be filled by default when the iSave action or your external post save action gets called by web forms markers, these are going to have values. So if you have any needs to know what the action ID is, the unique key, or even the action type, you can use these properties within your code. So let's put those all on the same line. And then you have two other methods here. You have an execute and you have a query state. A query state is just going to be a state to know if your save action is enabled or disabled. This can vary based off data either being entered or even on you could base it off roles or a different scenario in your application. So by default, I'm just going to have it return in enabled state for this training session. So it's just going to be enabled by default. And then we have an execute. An execute is going to be passed by default a form ID. This relates to the specific web forms markers form. You're going to have all the fields that have been entered as a adapted result list. So it's a collection type. I believe adapted result list inherits by IEnumerable, so it's something that you could write Lambda expressions on, or you can also there's some custom properties that you can call as well. And then there's some additional call context and some data that you can pass in as well if you need to. For this, I'm just going to demonstrate that, let's say you have a first name. Let's use Pascal case for this. So let's say you have a first name field. If you wanted to get that field inside this code, you can call adapted fields, and then you can do get entry by name. And then you'd say, first name. And then what that actually returns is not a string, it returns an adapted control result. So the adapted control result is basically just a collection or a class that has a field ID, a field name, field type, parameters, depending on what parameters that field might have. It also has, is this secure or not? And then lastly, the most important one is the value, which is a string value for that field. So whatever that person entered for the first name field would be the value, and it would be returned the first name. So you can see the limitation of this. So let's say you were building a, obviously with web forms markers, you're going to have any number of fields, any combination. You're not always, you can't say for sure that the user is always going to have a first name. So if you hard coded this data to post data to an external source, there's no way to know that you're going to have first name always. You can build a external post that's external post specific for this need, and you could do that, but I think it's kind of missing the mark per se, because the point of web forms markers is to make things dynamic, so that you could use this external post save action across the board for any purposes that you may have. So that's really what part 2 is going to kind of walk us into, and really what we're going to end up at the end of this full training session is a save action that's extremely powerful. You could use it for a lot of different purposes, because a server-side form post can be used for a lot of APIs in a lot of instances and things like that. If you're posting stuff to MailChimp or services along those lines, in most cases, you can form post data to them. So you could use this, customize it for the fields that you have, and form post that data to MailChimp, for example. And it would have, and you'd be able to match the fields up so that first name matches to whatever first name is in MailChimp, and everything would be perfect in that scenario. So, and also to note, you can have hidden fields inside web forms marker, so even those fields could be mapped over to web form or to whatever your third party external post source is. So very powerful. I'm going to kind of stop with this example. I'm going to go into how to make this more dynamic in my next session on this. So for now, just demonstrating that you can get the fields and then you can start doing things with them. Typically what you might have is some sort of method that says post to, for example, and you would take a parameter of, URL and then some sort of collection type of their, information provided. So that's pretty much what you would be building here, and you could build a pretty flexible system. So the next part is going into the actual Sitecore instance and defining this. So we created the class and define it. Now we're going to define it as an item so that you can reference it when you're using the form designer. So if we go into modules under system, so under Sitecore, system, modules, web forms and markers, and we go into the settings area, there is an area called actions. And then this is where we were kind of referring to before. There's a verifications area where you can define additional verifications. And then there's the save actions that these are all already built out of the box with web forms markers. So what I can do is click on save actions and right click insert and insert a new save action. And I'm just going to call this external post. And now out of that, you're going to have these fields. We're going to skip factory object name and MVC type and just specify an assembly. So the assembly will be example.infrastructure, and then the class will be this whole namespace plus the class name. So save that change, and then I'm just going to briefly talk about some of these other options. There's parameters. These are a shared field, so these would be parameters that you are wanting to pass to your code behind file, but you want them to be across all versions of this item. There are localized parameters, so if you wanted to customize parameters to English versus your Canadian region, this is where you could create different language versions of this item and specify these across the thing. You can do client actions, and lastly is these two fields, editor. Editor is where we're going to kind of go into the next session, where we're going to customize and create a kind of a sheer type editor dialog. At some point, I'm going to do also a speak dialog, but for this session, I'm just going to focus on doing phase 1 and phase 2 of this training session. The editor is just going to be a sheer dialog, an XML control, and XAML control technically. And it's just going to allow us to map the fields for our post and also specify the URL for our post. And then lastly, there is a query string field, which is where, again, you can add additional configuration for this external post save action. So now that we've defined it, what I want to do is I'm going to actually specify in one of our, so what I'm going to want to do is open up one of my sample forms in Web Forms Markers in the form designer. So that in order to do that, I'm going to go to all applications and click on Web Forms and Markers and go to Form Designer. And I'm just going to open up the leave a message global forms, the sample forms that comes with Web Forms Markers out of the box. And I'm going to click OK. And now we have these fields options. These are all, like I said, just samples that come with Web Forms Markers by default. And we're just going to make changes to this button, the submit button. So by default, you will see that there's all these things that you can make changes to that submit button. You can change the text, as we've talked about in our previous intro to Web Forms Markers. But the save actions specifically, there's a save actions and there's a form verifications. This is where you can specify. So what we were doing before is defining what you could select in these options. But in these options, you can have any variation of those save actions. You could have a save action that triggers all the save actions that are currently defined. theoretically. Or you could have save actions for your form that only trigger a goal, triggers a campaign, triggers an engagement plan. Maybe it triggers contact information into XDB, which I'm actually going to demonstrate that in a little bit, because that's kind of showcases what I want to achieve in terms of a user interface for this external post. So I'm going to go ahead and click on edit for save actions so we can start defining some of these. So by default, a goal is always there. You can't always see it until you add a new one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find a save action of all the defined save actions in the settings. I'm going to find one that I want to select. In this case, I'm going to select the external post and I'm going to add it. So as you can see, the register goal is actually already here, but you just can't see it. So the external post right now, all we have the ability to do is remove it. It's like register goal doesn't really exist. It's a more, it's hard to explain. It's kind of a default save action. You can't get rid of it. It's always there. So, but anyways, the external post, you see that it doesn't have any options. So what I want to do in phase 2 is allow you to have an edit option, so you can start customizing your external post. So an example of one of the save actions that already has that functionality is the update contact details. This is actually using XDB. So contact details inside the XDB engine. So update contact details, as you can see now, I can actually move it down because there's now technically 2, because this one isn't considered. But there is still no edit. But inside this one, there's actually an edit option. This is because they specified a control load. In this example, it's a example control. And if I click edit, it brings up this dialog. And this is what I want for my external post. Instead of these fields, there's actually an additional field with a place where they can specify a URL to post the data to. But then these fields actually are going to be matched up pretty closely. This one is not quite the same because this allows you, it's kind of like a fancy drop down, but whereas mine's going to be just a kind of a text box, a single line text box where a user can just type in the name that's used by the external system. But the form fields here on the left allows you to pick which fields that you define in your web forms for markers form to select. So let's say I wanted to say your name. Now I want to map that to a specific field in your external post. You could type that out here. In this instance, it's a contact detail, so it's not quite the same. But if you've ever worked with XDB, it's the concept of facets. And there's these facets that you are predefined with, and there's ways to customize, which eventually I'll be doing a session on that as well, how to customize the XDB engine, and add additional facets. But and facets are not the same thing as they are in the content search API, and I'll cover that in that session. But this is kind of out of the scope. But basically, what I'm saying is that we'll have this ability to map things to external sources, and this ability to customize these options. So it's going to be pretty cool what we'll be able to build here, and yeah. So that's it for this session. That's pretty much covers what we're going to be doing in the next session, and it's been a pretty quick introduction into a custom save action in web forms markers for this session. If you have any questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me. Please subscribe to my channel. If you have any recommendations on any videos that you'd love to see, me produce, please feel free to reach out to me and let me know. Even if I don't know the topic that well, I can always learn and research it and get more comfortable with it, and then do a training session on it. All right, that's it.